All right, let's talk about arson. When you hear that word, you probably picture massive flames, sirens, total destruction, right? But in the eyes of the law, a fire is so much more than just, well, fire. It's a complex crime with a very specific legal anatomy. And today, we're going to grab our scalpels and dissect this thing, piece by fascinating piece. And that really brings us to the big question, the one that sits at the very heart of all of this. What's the difference between a tragic accident, a candle tipping over, and a deliberate act that can lock someone away for decades? That line is everything. It's a razor-thin edge buried deep in the legal code, and it's what we're here to uncover. So to figure this all out, think of this explainer as your own personal legal toolkit. We're opening up the case, and we're going to give you the instruments you need to see exactly how lawyers and judges think. By the time we're done here, you'll be able to perform the legal dissection of arson yourself. So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the history and see why arson is so much more than just a fire. Then, we'll get into the basic anatomy of any crime. From there, we'll level up to something called destructive arson, where the stakes get way higher. We'll examine the insane ripple effects and penalties, look at other ways to cause mass destruction, and, finally, we'll flip the script and look at how you defend against these charges. Let's get into it. Okay, first things first. Section 1, arson is way more than just fire. And to really get why, you gotta understand that the law itself has a wild history. Now get this, because it's kind of wild. The original law for arson, Article 320, was on the books for years. Then, it was completely wiped out, repealed, gone. But then years later, lawmakers decided, wait a second, we actually need that, and they brought it back. This whole back and forth just shows you how crucial this specific crime is. The law was so important, it was literally resurrected. That brings us to Section 2. Before we can dissect arson, we have to understand the fundamental building blocks, the basic DNA of literally any crime. This is Criminal Law 101, and it's the foundation for everything else we're going to talk about. Okay, so check this out. Every single crime, I don't care if it's stealing a candy bar or the crime of the century, needs two key ingredients. You absolutely have to have both. The first is the physical act itself, what the lawyers call actus reus. And the second is the mental state behind it, the mens rea. It's like baking a cake. You can have all the flour in the world, but if you don't have any eggs, you're not getting a cake. Same thing here. No mental state, no crime. Let's use a metaphor to really hammer this home. The actus reus is the body of the crime. It's the physical, what you did. It's the swinging fist, the grabbed wallet, the lit match. You can see it, you can prove it happened. But a body without a mind is just an empty shell, right? That's where mens rea comes in. It's the mind of the crime. It's the knowing what you did. It's the intent, the spark of consciousness that takes a random physical event and turns it into a deliberate, punishable act. So let's apply this to arson. The actus reus is the physical skeleton of the crime. It's the undeniable fact that a fire happened. It's the burnt building, the charred evidence, the smoke. It's the pouring of the gasoline, the flick of the lighter. A prosecutor can literally point to a pile of ashes and say, see, this happened. It's the concrete starting point for any arson case. But a skeleton can't do anything on its own. It needs a nervous system to make it move. And that is the mens rea. This is the guilty mind. It's not just about a fire starting. It's about intending for that fire to start. This is what separates the person who accidentally drops a lit cigarette from the one who intentionally torches a building. One is a horrible accident. The other is a serious felony. And let me tell you, proving what was going on inside someone's head, that's almost always the toughest part of the entire case. All right, so now we have our basic formula. A physical act plus a guilty mind equals a crime. Simple, right? Well, now we're going to see how the law takes that simple formula and creates a kind of super crime. Welcome to Section 3, Destructive Arson, where the stakes are raised to a whole new level. See, the law says not all fires are created equal. There is a special list of targets that, if you burn them, automatically elevates the crime to destructive arson. And we're not talking about just any old shed in a backyard. We're talking about the big stuff: government buildings, hospitals, trains, airplanes, power plants, military bases. Even setting fire to a bunch of buildings at once gets you on this list. So why? Why does the law care so much more if you burn down a train station than a private house? Well, think of society as a living body. Burning down a house is like giving it a bad cut. It's serious, but it'll heal. But burning down these targets, that's like attacking the heart, the lungs, the brain. You're not just destroying property. You're attacking the very systems of transportation, government, and public safety that keep all of us alive and functioning. And then there's this other twist.
Sometimes the fire isn't even the main event. It's just a tool for another crime. This is also considered destructive arson. So imagine a business owner, John, who's drowning in debt. His brilliant plan? Burn his own factory to the ground to cash in on a huge insurance policy. Here, the fire is just a weapon being used to commit fraud. That makes it a compound crime, and the law takes that very seriously.
So when you attack society's vital organs like that, what happens next? That brings us to Section 4, where we look at the massive, devastating ripple effect of these crimes and the terrifying penalties that come with them.
The fire itself is like a stone dropped in a pond. The immediate splash is the burned building, but the real damage is in the ripples. We're talking billions in economic losses. A burned factory means hundreds of people are suddenly out of a job. A torched power station could mean an entire city goes dark. The flames might be out in a few hours, but the chaos and damage can continue to burn through a community for years.
Now, the law has a way of turning up the heat. It uses something called aggravating factors. And the best way to think about these is that they are literal gasoline on the fire of a crime. They make a bad situation exponentially worse. Burning one of those special public buildings, that's an aggravator. Doing it with a group of people, another aggravator. Using the fire to commit fraud, like our friend John, oh yeah, that's a huge one. Each one of these just jacks the potential penalty up and up and up.
And those penalties are absolutely staggering. Just take a second and look at this. For destructive arson, the starting point is reclusion perpetua. We'll get to what that means in a sec. And it goes all the way up to the death penalty. We're talking a minimum of 20 years behind bars, and if that fire kills someone, even by accident, the penalty is death. Period. The message from the law could not be clearer. Do this, and you risk everything.
So what in the world is reclusion perpetua? It's not a simple life sentence. It's way more complicated and honestly, way scarier. Imagine you're locked in a room. You know you'll be in there for at least 20 years. But the clock on the wall is broken. You have absolutely no idea if the door will ever open again. Maybe in 25 years, maybe in 40. That crushing uncertainty, that is part of the punishment itself.
Okay, so we've dissected destruction by fire pretty thoroughly. But what if you want to cause mass chaos without lighting a single match? Well, the law has thought of that too. In Section 5, we're going beyond the flames to look at a whole other category of destruction. Think of the law as having two different toolboxes for destruction. Article 320 is the one just for fire. That's the arson law we've been focused on. But Article 324 is the catch-all for pretty much every other catastrophic thing you can imagine. The goal is the same, widespread damage, but the methods are totally different. And what a toolkit it is. We're talking about causing explosions, deliberately flooding an entire town, sinking a ship, tearing up railroad tracks to cause a derailment, unleashing a massive electrical surge to fry the grid, even cutting communication lines. Each of these can cause just as much chaos as a fire, crippling society in a different way. But for all these other types of destruction, the law pivots on one single, absolutely critical question. Was anyone's life put in danger? Look at that difference. If your act of destruction didn't endanger a soul, you might get up to 12 years. But if the very same act did put people at risk, that penalty skyrockets to a 20-year maximum. The law is screaming that human life is the ultimate priority. Just to put some names to those numbers, the higher penalty when lives are at stake is called reclusion temporal. That's 12 to 20 years. The lower one is prisión mayor, from 6 to 12 years. They're just the fancy legal labels for two very different worlds of punishment, and the only thing that separates them is the risk you pose to other people. All right, for this entire dissection, we've been on the prosecution side of the table, building the case. But a full analysis means looking at every angle. So for our last section, let's flip the script. Let's put on our defense attorney hats and figure out how you fight back against these charges. So how do you do it? You go straight for the heart of the crime's anatomy. The number one target is always the mens rea, that guilty mind. The defense will argue, yes, a fire happened, but it was an accident. I tripped and knocked over a heater. Or maybe it was beyond their control. A freak power surge started it. Another classic defense is duress. I was forced to do it. Someone threatened my family. And for those other destruction crimes, a huge argument is, hey, what I did may have been destructive, but it puts 0 people in actual danger, which could slash the sentence. And that kind of leaves us here. We spent all this time looking at the neat, clear lines the law tries to draw between an accident and a crime, between property damage and an attack on society.
But now picture a real disaster scene, the smoke, the panic, the conflicting stories. The law is written in black and white, but reality is almost always a messy, complicated shade of gray. So the question is, in all that chaos, how clearly can anyone really see the line that turns one little spark into a life sentence?